Hey, NL110, this is Ensign Santana with Commander Norton, and today we're going to be talking about culture. From sociology, we know that there's many different aspects of culture. Sir, can you elaborate on a few of them and how it is important as a aspiring naval officer to have these sense of culture?
Hey Juan, absolutely, and it's awesome to be here with you. Thank you very much. There are so many different aspects of culture. We could have a whole course on just this. It's everything from the food we eat to the music we listen to the clothes we wear. I think, though, for an aspiring naval officer, I want to focus on a couple things. I want to focus on norms and also values. As far as norms go, there's a couple different kinds. We have formal norms and informal norms. Now, a formal norm is something that's written down and official. For instance, out in society as a civilian, we follow laws that are written down. And then here at the Naval Academy, mid-regs is a great example of a formal norm. It's something that it is written down and we're bound to follow it. An informal norm is equally important, but it's not necessarily written down, right? So that's these word of mouth things that we learn from our mentors or just from the people that are more senior to us about the way of doing business. You can think about your company or your team, the way formations happen and the way practice goes. It isn't exactly scripted out, but it's happening consistently pretty much each time you do it. So that's a pretty good example of an informal norm. Now, as far as values go, there's a connection, and we'll explore that in a little bit. But the values are a little bit different than our individual values. We're going to talk about individual values in a couple lessons. As a part of culture, though, these are things that a society looks at that are collectively good or collectively desirable.
So, sir, now that we're talking about values, what are some of the sources of cultural values as military leaders?
Yeah, that's another great question, Juan. So if these values are things that are collectively good, as a military officer, we have to look at some of those sources as we join the military. I think we can look back to the oath ceremony where everyone raised their right hand to join the Navy as a midshipman, and we can look at that oath that we took as a source of those values. Also, that document that we took the oath to, the Constitution, and all of the different values that the Constitution spells out, the founding document of our country. Those are things that as a culture of military officers, we need to basically sign up to. I've got a slide here because earlier I said that there was a connection, I believe, between values and norms. It's sort of a funny one. I'm going to give you just a minute to look it over, showing the difference between the aviation culture and the surface warfare culture. Definitely meant to be a joke. But from the aviation side, from my background, one thing that we value is rest. And it comes, believe it or not, from a formal norm. And it's written down in our regulations that we have to get a certain amount of rest before we go flying. That's written in blood, as they say, because before that rule, we were crashing aircraft at a much higher rate and killing pilots at a much higher rate than after that rule was implemented. So as that norm became formalized, the value of rest before flying was sort of part of our culture moving forward. So anyway, that's how I see the relation between norms and values. And I think that from time to time, back to the personal values I mentioned, those things that we come to the military with aren't always 100% in sync with what the military is asking of us.
That's a good point, sir. Are there any concepts that can help us understand the conflict of values and when it might lead us down the wrong path?
Yeah, I think there's a couple of good ones here we can bring in. One, the concept of a subculture and a counterculture. Because what we don't want is just a bunch of robots that show up and subscribe to the Constitution and the oath, and then that's it, right? We want that diversity of values that we bring to the military. but we want it in a manner that's compatible with what we're asking. So the first topic, or the first term, is subculture. Now, a subculture is something that's nested underneath the overarching culture. A lot of times in sociology, we like to talk about a culture or society as this broad group of people across a large area. For our purposes in NL 110, I want to talk about the culture of the Naval Academy. So that's going to be our overarching culture. And then you look within the Naval Academy, and there are 30 different companies. There are many different sports teams, clubs, ECAs. All those little groups underneath have a different way slightly of acting, doing business. Some of the informal norms that they have are different. All that is good as long as it doesn't go against what the Naval Academy is trying to do, value-wise. As soon as it does oppose, and the reading uses the word conspicuously oppose, it makes you want to think of like an anarchist or some sort of rebellion. I'm going to back it off that a little bit for this course and just say, you know, if your subgroup is going against what the Naval Academy is asking, that's where you become a counterculture. So both of them are groups underneath the Naval Academy culture. It's that counterculture, back to your original question, I think that's what can lead us down the wrong path. As soon as our norms and our values are opposed to what we're being asked to do here, that's a problem, and that can lead us down the wrong path. Interestingly, I'd like to ask in class, what do you think is more important as you're operating in your subgroups? Do you think it's those formal norms or the informal norms that are governing your behavior more?
That's a very interesting question, sir. So actually, as a recent graduate and recent midshipman myself, I will say that formal norms are just as important as informal norms, because the informal norms, they bond us together as a group. And even though there might be subgroups within a company, from my experience, I remember how sometimes these subgroups will tear apart a company. So the formal norms are needed, but the informal norms at the end of the day will keep us together as a culture. And as you said, every company has a different culture. I was in 13th company, so we had a very strong culture because we ran the ball every year to the Army-Navy game. So that was a very interesting event, and where everybody just came together as a single culture, no subculture, and informal norms were there, of course, because we were the only company that did this at the academy. So it was very interesting to see how those two intertwine together. And sir, I have one last term that I wanted to bring up from the reading, and that is ethnocentrism. What is that all about, sir?
Yeah, I'd be happy to talk about ethnocentrism. Before I do, though, I just want to thank you for that ball running example. That's the perfect example of a subculture. This awesome tradition with its formal and informal norms associated with it, nested within the Naval Academy. I can remember one day dropping my daughter in the 6th grade at the time off at middle school and coming down Route 2 towards the Naval Academy and seeing your team running up Route 2 just starting off. So perfect example. Thank you. To your question, ethnocentrism, what that is basically about is viewing your culture, your way, as right, the best, whatever term you want to put in there, and without considering the other culture, is the best way to put it. So as an example, the old ugly American going overseas, on military, I would be on deployment, I would be on a ship and we'd stop in a foreign port. Sometimes you'd see sailors going out there and they just want to flaunt the Western way, as if it was the only way, the right way. That's an example of ethnocentrism. Opposed to that, what you have is you want to talk about tolerance and you want to talk about understanding. Now, the word tolerance doesn't necessarily mean relativism, because like we said in your values question, there are certain things as military officers we want to subscribe to. Those values in the Constitution, our way of doing business as military officers. When we go to another culture, there are going to be some things that we disagree with, that we end up tolerating. And it's because we disagree with them that we tolerate it. but we at least have to be open to looking at the other culture and looking at their way of life, without going in as an opening argument that I'm right and I'm good. So that's what ethnocentrism is all about. At a cultural level, that's the term. At an individual level, later in this class, when we talk about things like critical thinking and civility, we're going to revisit that for ourselves and our relationships and explore how we can prevent that type of attitude from interfering with the relationships we're trying to form.
So, sir, as a plebe at the Naval Academy, how do you see this being of importance matter?
Well, I'll tell you one thing that jumps right to mind is this thing that's been going on even since I was a midshipman back in the day, right? It's this conflict between athletes and NARPs. That's the term nowadays, right? Non-athletic regular person. I know as a midshipman, I was a NARP, and that's the experience I knew. I didn't know necessarily what all my friends were doing when they went off to practice. Of course, I knew what they were doing, and they were on a team, and that's awesome. But I didn't live life in their shoes. I didn't try to. And then I went on, and I came back as a company officer, and I realized, wow, there are all these unique experiences going on here, and not a single one of them is right or wrong. They're just all different. So you have some people here that are NARPs that they don't have a particular recruited sport, but they go off to sports period and they have intramurals, and that's awesome. And then you have people that have a heavy varsity practice schedule from plebe year, and that's their whole life at the Naval Academy practically, outside of the academic and professional development that they do. And that's okay too. The problem comes, I think, as a midshipman when you don't try to appreciate the other side and you say, there's someone not like me, they're not doing what I'm doing, therefore they must be wrong. And I think that causes a lot of unnecessary conflict, to be honest. If we could just get over the fact that there's more than one right way to be a midshipman, and in the end, we're all going to be developed as leaders and graduate and go on to lead in divisions and lead Marines, it's going to be okay no matter which path you take through the Naval Academy.
Well, sir, thank you for your time. And don't forget to join us, everyone, on our next episode on socialization.